By midnight, the kingdom would learn that the most dangerous thing in the palace was not the Alpha King's curse, but the Omega who walked toward it without lowering his eyes. Noah Whitaker heard the whispers before he saw the altar. They moved through the royal cathedral like cold air beneath a locked door, brushing against silk gowns, polished boots, and jeweled hands raised to hide cruel smiles. Rejected Omega. Replacement groom. Scentless mistake. The words should have hurt more, but Noah had been living inside them for so long that they no longer felt like knives. They felt like weather. Unpleasant, familiar, and impossible to stop. The aisle stretched ahead of him beneath a crimson runner, nearly 80 feet of polished stone and golden candlelight, and at the end of it stood Alpha King Adrian Blackwell. He was taller than every man around him, dressed in black ceremonial armor trimmed with silver, his crown resting on dark hair like something ancient and heavy. He did not look like a groom waiting for a husband. He looked like a winter storm forced into human shape. His pale gray eyes never softened as Noah approached. Not once. The nobles noticed. Of course they did. Their excitement sharpened with every step Noah took, as if they had not come to witness a wedding, but the beginning of a beautiful public disaster. Noah kept his shoulders straight. His white wedding coat had been tailored for his older brother Julian, the perfect Omega son who had vanished 3 hours before the ceremony, leaving behind only a locked bedroom window and a family desperate enough to offer Noah in his place. No one had asked Noah what he wanted. They never did. His father had simply looked at him with that familiar expression of disappointment and relief and said, "For once, make yourself useful." So Noah had come, not because he believed in duty, not because he dreamed of crowns or royal affection. He came because the palace, even with its frozen halls and dangerous king, was still a door out of the house that had buried him alive. When he reached the altar, Adrian finally turned fully toward him. The king's scent was faint but unmistakable, like cedarwood, frost, and distant thunder held behind glass. It pressed against the room without touching anyone, a warning every Alpha and Omega understood. The priest's voice trembled through the vows. Noah answered clearly. Adrian answered like each word cost him something. A platinum band slid onto Noah's finger, cool and perfect and strange. Then the cathedral bells rang, and the kingdom applauded with the excitement of people waiting for a secret to break. Hours later, behind the sealed doors of the royal wedding chamber, the silence became heavier than the crown. Black candles burned along the walls. Snow tapped softly against the tall windows. Adrian stood several feet away, hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. "You will not survive the wedding night," he said at last, his voice low enough to turn the air still. Noah should have stepped back. He should have begged, cried, or asked to be released. Instead, he slowly removed his veil and looked straight into the eyes of the king everyone feared. "I was rejected long before tonight," Noah said, calm as falling snow. "Death is not the worst thing that can happen to me." For the first time since the ceremony began, Adrian Blackwell looked surprised. That surprise lasted only a breath, but Noah saw it, and for reasons he could not explain, it mattered more than all the jewels in the royal chamber. Alpha King Adrian Blackwell had expected tears, trembling hands, maybe a desperate plea to be sent back to the Whitaker estate before midnight. He had not expected an Omega in an ill-fitted wedding coat to speak as if fear had already spent years trying and failing to control him. Noah lowered his eyes first, not in surrender, but because the silver thread on his sleeve had begun to unravel, and the sight almost made him laugh. Even at the royal palace, even under black candles and a ceiling painted with old kings, he was still wearing something made for Julian. It had always been that way. Julian Whitaker had been born golden, with soft blonde curls, a bright rose scent, and the effortless grace that made strangers smile before he spoke. Noah had been born quiet, dark-haired, pale, and nearly scentless, an Omega who could stand in a crowded room and leave no trace in the air. In a world where scent was identity, status, promise, and power, that absence followed him like a stain. His father called it a defect. His mother called it unfortunate. The household staff called it sad when they thought he could not hear. The first time Noah truly understood what rejection meant, he was 17 and standing in the garden beneath white lanterns while Ethan Caldwell, the alpha heir chosen to become his future husband, looked at him with polite embarrassment. Ethan was handsome in the easy way rich boys often were, with smooth manners, bright blue eyes, and a smile that appeared whenever an audience was watching. In private, he was less cruel than careless, which somehow hurt more. He had leaned close enough for Noah to hear him over the music and said, very softly, "You are kind, Noah, but I need an Omega people can recognize the moment he enters a room." The next morning, the engagement was dissolved for reasons of compatibility. By dinner, every noble family in the capital knew the truth. Scentless, unwanted, not enough. After that, Noah was moved to the north wing of the Whitaker estate, a pretty prison with pale curtains, locked doors, and a garden he could see but rarely enter. His lessons stopped. Invitations stopped. His family stopped using his name unless they needed something carried, signed, or endured in silence. Julian continued attending balls, appearing in portraits, and receiving letters sealed with royal wax. Noah became a shadow in the house where he had been born. Then, on the morning of the royal wedding, everything shattered with a single empty bedroom. Julian was gone. His window was open. His travel cloak was missing. On the vanity, he had left only a pearl pin and a note that said he refused to marry a cursed king. The Whitaker family did not grieve. They calculated. Within minutes, servants were pulling Noah from the north wing, washing his hair, buttoning Julian's coat around his slimmer frame, and warning him not to embarrass the family more than he already had by existing. His father did not apologize. He only placed both hands on Noah's shoulders, looked him over, like a flawed painting, and said, "At least this way, you may finally serve a purpose." Noah remembered staring at him, waiting for pain to rise. Instead, there was only a strange, clean emptiness. Now, standing inside the king's chamber with snow tapping the windows and Adrian watching him, as if he were a question no one had prepared him to answer, Noah realized the truth. He had not accepted the marriage because he was brave. He had accepted because the life behind him had already ended, and whatever waited inside this palace could not be worse than being unwanted in his own home. Adrian turned away first, and the movement was so controlled that it felt practiced, as if every inch of him had been trained to conceal whatever storm lived beneath his skin. He crossed the chamber to the tall windows, where the snow blurred the palace gardens into a white, silent world, and for a moment Noah could see only the dark line of the king's shoulders against the glass. There was power in that silhouette, yes, but there was also distance, the kind a man built around himself when everyone who came close learned to fear him. The stories about Adrian Blackwell had reached even the locked north wing of the Whitaker estate. Servants whispered them while changing linens. Guards traded them in low voices near the gates. Mothers used his name to frighten reckless children into obedience. They called him the Widowmaker King, not because he had ever buried a husband, but because every Omega brought to the palace before Noah had left it broken in some quiet, irreversible way. The first had been Lady Mason, a beautiful Omega from the western coast, praised for a lavender scent so strong it could fill a ballroom. She lasted 3 weeks before her family took her home under a veil of secrecy, refusing every question. The second had been Thomas Avery, gentle and educated, chosen by the council because he came from an old bloodline and had studied royal customs since childhood. He left after a single red moon, pale and silent, unable to stand the sound of bells. The third had been Elias Hart, an ambitious noble Omega who had smiled for every portrait and spoken confidently about becoming the heart of the kingdom. By morning, the palace announced that the engagement was dissolved for reasons of health, and Elias was never seen at court again. The nobles blamed Adrian. The priests blamed the curse. The people blamed the bloodline. Noah had believed the rumors because everyone believed them, but standing there now, he saw the details no rumor had bothered to carry. The faint marks around Adrian's wrists, old and pale against his skin. The iron rings set into the marble columns near the bed, half hidden behind velvet drapes. The careful distance he kept, not from disgust, but from restraint. Adrian noticed where Noah was looking, and his jaw tightened. "You should not study things you do not understand," he said. Noah looked at the iron rings again, then explained them. The king gave a humorless smile, but it did not reach his eyes. "Those are not for prisoners." The candles trembled as a low pressure moved through the room. Not quite a scent, not quite a sound, more like the air before lightning. Noah felt it brush against his chest, cold and immense, and his pulse quickened despite himself. Adrian stepped farther away. Every red moon, the Blackwell blood changes. My presence becomes dangerous to any Omega near me. The council calls it royal dominance. The temple calls it divine burden. I call it a cage. His voice dropped, rougher now, less like a king and more like a man speaking from a locked room. I warned each of them. None believed me until the night came. Noah should have felt relief that the monster had named himself. Instead, he felt the strange ache of recognition. So you frighten people before they can choose you. Adrian looked back at him then, and something in his gray eyes flickered like a candle nearly blown out. No, he said quietly. I frighten them so they can survive leaving me. The answer should have ended the conversation between them, but instead it opened something Noah had not expected to find inside the royal wedding chamber, a silence that felt honest. Adrian Blackwell did not move closer. Noah did not move away. Between them, black candles burned low in their silver holders, and beyond the windows, snow gathered on the balcony rail like powdered glass. For several minutes, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Then the bells began. They rang from the highest tower, 12 slow notes rolling across the frozen gardens, marking midnight. With the first sound, Adrian's face changed. It was subtle at first, a tightening around his eyes, a sudden stillness in his hands, but Noah felt the room respond before he understood why. The air grew colder. The candle flames bent sideways though no window had opened. Somewhere beneath the stone floor, something ancient seemed to wake. Adrian turned sharply toward the marble column near the bed, where the iron rings were fixed behind velvet drapes. Stay where you are, he ordered, but the command was not cruel. It was strained, almost desperate. He pulled a narrow key from beneath his collar, unlocked the heavy chain already waiting there, and fastened one cuff around his own wrist with the efficiency of a man who had done this too many times. Noah stared, unable to hide his shock. You prepared this before the wedding. Adrian secured the second cuff to the opposite wrist, forcing distance between his body and the rest of the room. I prepare it every red moon. The second bell rang. A wave of pressure swept outward from him, deep and cold, carrying the scent of cedarwood, frost, and thunderclouds over a mountain ridge. Noah's knees weakened, but he remained standing. The force was not like the crude alpha dominance he had feared in ballrooms and noble houses. This was larger, lonelier, less like a man trying to command, and more like a storm with no sky to escape into. The third bell rang. The glass panes shivered. The black candles guttered. Adrian lowered his head, breathing carefully through his nose, every muscle held under fierce control. Leave, he said. There is a side door behind the screen. It opens to the Queen's corridor. Walk 50 feet, turn left, and keep walking until you find guards in white cloaks. Tell them I ordered you out. Noah looked toward the painted screen. The door was real. Escape was real. For the first time since his father had sent him to the altar, someone had given him a way out. His hand lifted, almost, reaching for it. Then the fourth bell rang, and Adrian's left cuff slipped half an inch lower because one of the old bolts in the marble had cracked. Adrian saw it at the same time Noah did. The king's expression hardened into something like dread. If the restraint failed, not because he wanted freedom, but because the curse would turn every careful rule against him, the whole palace would blame him again. Noah moved before fear could stop him. Do not come closer, Adrian warned, his voice rough with effort. Noah ignored the warning and crossed the 15 feet between them. On the small table beside the bed lay the ceremonial wedding knife, its silver handle shaped like a lily, meant for cutting ribbon during the old blessing ritual. Noah took it, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Adrian's eyes widened. Noah. It was the first time he had said his name. The fifth bell rang. Noah knelt beside the marble column, fingers shaking as he examined the chain. The problem was not the cuff. It was the angle. The old restraint was pulling against the cracked stone, making the pressure worse each time Adrian fought to hold himself still. You have been locking yourself in wrong, Noah said, breathless. You are forcing the chain to pull against the weakest side. Adrian stared at him as if no one had ever considered that his suffering might be badly engineered instead of deserved. Noah slid the knife under the decorative binding around the lower anchor and cut through the stiff ceremonial cord, holding it out of alignment. The chain dropped 3 inches, settling into the stronger iron bracket beneath. The pressure in the room eased. Not completely, but enough for the candles to stand upright again. Enough for Adrian to breathe. Enough for Noah to realize that the terrible wedding night everyone had feared had not become a hunt, or a punishment, or a royal disaster. It had become a rescue. Adrian looked down at him, shaken beyond any mask a crown could hide. Noah's own hidden sense stirred for the first time in years, faint as snow melting over white flowers. The 6th bell rang, and Adrian whispered, almost in disbelief, "What are you?" Noah rose slowly, still holding the little silver knife at his side. "Someone who noticed the cage was broken," he said. Outside the chamber, footsteps rushed toward the door, and the palace began to wake. The footsteps stopped outside the wedding chamber, just as the final bell faded into the bones of the palace. For one suspended moment, Noah stood between the door and the chained king, the small silver wedding knife still in his hand, his pulse loud enough that he thought Adrian might hear it. Then a firm voice called from the corridor, asking if His Majesty required assistance. Adrian closed his eyes, drew one careful breath, and when he opened them again, the mask of the Alpha King had returned. "No one enters," he commanded. The effect was immediate. Armor shifted outside the door, then silence fell, obedient and complete. Noah looked at him, at the cuffs still around his wrists, at the old scars half hidden beneath silver shadows, and understood that the palace did not protect Adrian from the curse. It protected the legend of him. For the rest of the night, the two of them remained in that strange, cold room without crossing the line between caution and trust. Noah adjusted the chain when the pressure in the air sharpened. Adrian warned him when to step back. Neither of them spoke of marriage. Neither of them spoke of fear. But just before dawn, when the sky beyond the windows turned the pale blue of frozen glass, Adrian finally unlocked the cuffs with hands that were steady only because he forced them to be. "When the doors open," he said quietly, "walk behind me. Keep your chin up. Do not answer anyone unless I tell you to." Noah rubbed his tired fingers together, still feeling the ghost of iron and ceremonial cord. "You sound as if I am walking into a trial." Adrian looked toward the door. "You are." At sunrise, the royal chamber opened, and the palace learned the impossible. Noah Whitaker was alive. Not carried out under a veil, not hidden behind physicians, not sent away in a closed carriage like the others. He walked out on his own 2 feet, pale from exhaustion but upright, his dark hair loose around his face, and the platinum ring still shining on his finger. The corridor outside, filled with nobles, guards, servants, and council members who had clearly gathered to witness a tragedy and found themselves staring at a problem instead. Whispers broke apart and reformed in the space around him. Survived. Impossible. What did he do? Adrian stood beside him, silent as a wall of black ice. And for the first time Noah felt the full weight of being seen by a kingdom that had expected him to disappear. At the end of the corridor stood High Priest Caleb Monroe in white and gold robes, his smooth face arranged into concern that did not reach his pale blue eyes. He was younger than Noah expected, perhaps in his late 30s, handsome in a polished, untouchable way, with blonde hair brushed neatly back and a silver temple seal resting against his throat. He looked at Adrian first, then at Noah, and in that brief glance Noah felt something colder than curiosity. "Calculation." "Your Majesty," Caleb said, bowing with perfect grace. "The temple rejoices that the night passed without disaster." Adrian's voice was flat. "Does it?" A thin smile touched Caleb's mouth. "Of course. Though such an unusual outcome will require examination. For the safety of the crown, and for the peace of the people." Noah understood the trap before anyone explained it. If he had failed to survive, he would have been pitted for a day and forgotten by morning. Because he had survived, he had become evidence of something no one could control. By noon, rumors moved through the palace faster than winter wind. The rejected Omega had used forbidden influence. The scentless groom had hidden temple magic. The king had been weakened by an outsider. Servants avoided Noah's eyes. Guards watched him as if his quiet steps might crack the marble. Adrian ordered him to remain in the queen's apartments until the council could be managed, claiming it was for protection. But Noah stood in the center of the vast room with its white curtains and locked balcony doors and felt the old north wing closing around him again. When Adrian came to check on him near sunset, Noah was waiting beside the window. "A cage is still a cage," he said softly, "even when it is built by someone who cares." Adrian stopped, just inside the door, and for the first time that day, the king had no answer. Adrian remained at the doorway as the last light of evening turned the queen's apartments gold, his expression unreadable, but the quiet between them was no longer empty. Noah could see the answer. He would not speak. He had locked Noah inside these rooms because he was afraid, not of Noah, but for him, and somehow that made the walls feel even harder to forgive. The next morning, the royal council assembled in the throne hall beneath banners of black silk and silver thread. Noah stood at Adrian's right side in a formal white coat that still felt like borrowed skin, while High Priest Caleb Monroe faced them from the center of the marble floor, his hands folded neatly over the temple seal at his chest. Around them, nobles waited with bright eyes and careful mouths, hungry for a scandal they could dress as concern. Caleb did not accuse Noah directly. He was too polished for that. He spoke instead of tradition, public stability, dangerous anomalies, and the need to investigate any Omega whose presence altered the royal curse. Every sentence sounded reasonable until Noah heard the shape beneath it. Caleb wanted permission to take him away. Adrian heard it too. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. "No," the king said. One word, quiet and final. Caleb bowed his head. "Your Majesty, your attachment to the matter may already be affecting your judgment." A ripple moved through the nobles. Noah looked at Adrian, expecting anger, expecting a command that would send the priest backward with nothing but royal authority. Instead, Adrian went still, too still. Then he turned his gaze toward Noah, and the gray in his eyes became colder than the snow beyond the palace windows. "There is no attachment," Adrian said. The words crossed the space between them with perfect clarity. "The Omega means nothing to me." Noah knew it was a lie the moment he heard it. He saw the small tension in Adrian's jaw, the way his hand curled once before relaxing at his side, the way his eyes refused to stay on Noah's face for more than a heartbeat. It was strategy. It had to be strategy. If Adrian appeared indifferent, Caleb would lose the excuse of emotional influence. If the court believed Noah was only a political inconvenience, perhaps they would stop trying to turn him into a threat. Noah understood all of that. Understanding did not stop the old wound from opening. For one terrible second, he was 17 again beneath white garden lanterns, listening to Ethan Caldwell explain that he needed an Omega people could recognize. He was back in the North Wing, hearing servants lower their voices when they passed his door. He was his father's disappointment, Julian's replacement, the scentless mistake who could be offered to a cursed king because no one had expected him to last the night. Noah lowered his eyes, not because the court had won, but because he refused to let them see what the sentence had done to him. Caleb smiled as if he had witnessed exactly what he wanted. Then there should be no objection to a formal temple review. Adrian's voice sharpened. There will be no review. The council session ended in a storm of whispers, but Noah did not wait for the king to escort him back. He walked alone through the side corridor, past portraits of dead queens and silent guards who pretended not to stare. By nightfall, he had left the queen's apartments and moved into the old royal library, a forgotten wing with high shelves, dust-covered tables, and tall windows that looked over the frozen courtyard. If he was going to be trapped, he would choose the room himself. He searched until his fingers were gray with dust, pulling down books on Blackwell history, temple law, Red Moon records, and old Omega bloodlines. Somewhere near midnight, exhaustion found him. He fell asleep with his cheek against an open page, the candle burning low beside him. Hours later, Adrian found him there. Noah did not wake when the king entered, or when he stood beside the table in silence, reading the notes Noah had written in the margins. He only stirred when something warm settled over his shoulders. Adrian's black cloak smelled faintly of cedarwood and frost. The king stood there for a long time, looking down at the Omega he had denied in front of a room full of enemies, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so low it barely touched the air. "I am sorry," he whispered. Noah slept on, but his hand closed around the edge of the cloak as if some wounded part of him had heard. Noah woke before dawn with Adrian's cloak around his shoulders and a line of ink pressed faintly against his cheek. For a moment, he did not remember where he was. The library rose above him in shadowed tiers, Thousands of old books sleeping behind glass doors, the tall windows silver with early snow. Then memory returned in pieces. The throne hall, the lie, the old wound, the quiet apology he might have dreamed. He sat up slowly and found a fresh candle burning beside him, along with a tray of tea, toast, and sliced apples. No servant had entered without permission. That meant Adrian had left it there himself. Noah wanted to be angry at the kindness. Anger was easier than hope. Instead, he pulled the cloak closer and returned to the book open beneath his hand. It was a temple registry from almost 80 years ago, its pages brittle and yellowed, recording every Omega brought to the palace during a red moon cycle. The entries were written in the same careful script, cold and official, but Noah noticed what no one had mentioned. The names did not end with Adrian's reign. They went back generations. Before Adrian, before his father, before his grandfather, there had been other Omegas, other sudden illnesses, other quiet removals from court, always under the supervision of the temple, always signed by a high priest from Caleb Monroe's bloodline. Noah's fingers tightened on the page. The curse was not simply a burden that appeared when the moon turned red. It was a system maintained by people who benefited from keeping the Blackwell kings afraid of themselves. By mid-morning, Noah had built a map across the library table using old records, family trees, temple notes, and faded letters hidden inside a cracked leather box behind the restricted shelves. One letter stopped his breath completely. It was written in his mother's handwriting. He knew the elegant slant of it, the careful loops, the beauty she used even when writing cold instructions to servants. But this letter was different. It was addressed to a royal physician and dated the week after Noah was born. My younger son shows signs of a lunabond scent. If the temple learns of this, they will claim him for the crown. I ask that the seal be placed before his first presentation. Let the world believe he has no scent. Let him be overlooked, if that is what keeps him safe. Noah read the lines 3 times before the room steadied. His scentless life had not been a defect. It had been a hiding place. Every insult, every rejection, every year in the North Wing had grown from a protection he had never been told about. He did not know whether to forgive his mother or mourn the boy he might have been. The door opened quietly behind him. Adrian entered without crown or armor, dressed only in a dark coat, his expression guarded until he saw Noah's face. What happened? Noah handed him the letter. Adrian read it in silence, and with each line, something dangerous and sorrowful moved through his eyes. Lunabond Omegas were believed to be extinct, he said at last. They could stabilize royal alpha blood during red moon cycles. They were not worshipped for it. They were used. Noah looked down at the scattered records. Caleb knows. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Are you certain? Noah pointed to the temple seal on the physician's reply, the same silver sun Caleb wore at his throat. His family knew before I could speak. The truth settled between them, heavier than any vow they had taken at the altar. Adrian looked at the books, then at Noah, and the distance he had tried so hard to maintain finally cracked. I tried to make the court believe you meant nothing because I thought it would keep you safe. Noah's voice softened, but did not break. People have been keeping me safe by making me feel worthless my entire life. Adrian flinched as if the words had reached somewhere deeper than anger. Before he could answer, the library doors opened again, this time without gentleness. A royal messenger stood there, pale and breathless, holding a white summons marked with the temple seal. Your Majesty, he said, eyes fixed on the floor. High Priest Monroe has called an emergency rite for tonight. Attendance is mandatory. Noah looked at the seal and felt, beneath his skin, the first clear pulse of snow and white flowers waking from a long sleep. Caleb was not waiting anymore, and neither was he. The emergency rite was held in the Winter Throne Hall, not the temple, and that alone told Noah everything. Caleb Monroe did not want prayer. He wanted an audience. By sunset, every noble house in the capital had been summoned beneath the vaulted ceiling, where black banners hung beside white temple silk, and the great silver throne waited on its raised platform like a judgment carved from ice. Noah entered beside Adrian with his hands calm at his sides, though the pulse beneath his skin had become impossible to ignore. Snow and white flowers, moonlight over frozen ground. A scent that should not exist was waking inside him, pressing gently against the seal that had kept him hidden for 23 years. Adrian felt it too. Noah saw the moment the king noticed, a slight turn of his head, a flash of concern in his gray eyes. But he did not reach for him. Not here. Not in front of a room built to turn tenderness into weakness. Caleb stood at the foot of the throne in robes of white and gold, his temple seal shining against his throat. Around him waited 12 priests, each holding a silver candle. Their faces were serene, but their formation was not holy. It was a circle, a boundary, a trap dressed as ceremony. "Your Majesty," Caleb called, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "The kingdom deserves clarity. For generations, the temple has protected the crown from the instability of Blackwell blood. But now an unregistered omega of unknown nature has interfered with that sacred balance." Murmurs rose like wind over dry leaves. Noah kept his chin lifted. Caleb turned to him with a smile gentle enough to fool anyone who did not know how calculation looked behind blue eyes. "Noah Whitaker, step forward and submit to the right of examination." Adrian's answer came before Noah could move. "No," Caleb's smile widened. "Then the court must ask why its king refuses transparency. Is it judgment that guides you, or the influence of a hidden scent?" The words landed exactly where Caleb wanted them to land. Nobles shifted. Council members whispered. The silver candles brightened in the priest's hands, and the air tightened around Noah like invisible thread. His breathing changed, shallow but steady. Adrian stepped toward the throne, and for one terrible moment Noah thought he was returning to the role Caleb had written for him. The distant king, the untouchable monarch, the man who would protect the crown by sacrificing the heart. Caleb bowed his head, already victorious. "Choose, Your Majesty. Preserve your throne and release the Omega to temple care, or stand with him and prove that the crown is compromised." Adrian climbed the 3 marble steps to the throne. The hall went silent. Noah felt the old fear rise in him. The North Wing fear, the Garden Lantern fear, the ache of being unwanted repeated so many times that it had begun to sound like truth. Then Adrian lifted the crown from his head. It looked heavy in his hands, black silver and winter diamonds, the symbol of everything men had obeyed for centuries. He did not place it on the throne. He let it fall onto the marble at his feet, where the sound cracked through the hall like the end of an old law. "A crown that demands his silence was never mine," Adrian said. The room froze. Caleb's face changed for the first time, the polished calm breaking into something sharp and afraid. "You would endanger a kingdom for one rejected Omega?" Noah stepped forward before Adrian could answer. The seal inside him finally gave way, not with pain, but with release, like a locked window opening after years of winter. His scent unfolded through the hall, clean and luminous, snow melting beneath morning sun, white flowers blooming where no garden had been planted. The silver candles in the priest's hands dimmed. The pressure around Adrian softened. Every noble in the room fell silent, not because they were forced to, but because the truth had become impossible to deny. Noah was not a defect. He was not a substitute. He was the missing piece the temple had buried in plain sight. Caleb stepped back, one hand closing around his temple seal as the old markings on the marble floor flickered and faded. "This is not possible," he whispered. Noah looked at him, calm at last. "That is what people say when the person they tried to erase learns his own name." Adrian came down from the throne and stood beside him, not in front of him, not behind him, but beside him. Together, they faced the court as the last of Caleb's ceremony dissolved into ordinary candle smoke. By morning, the winter throne hall no longer belonged to rumors. It belonged to evidence. The old temple records were brought from the library. The physician letters were read aloud before the council, and the marble markings Caleb Monroe had hidden beneath years of ceremony were uncovered beneath the silver carpets. No one shouted. No one needed to. The truth was quieter than outrage and far more powerful. For generations, the temple had taught Blackwell kings to fear their own blood, then offered itself as the only hand strong enough to guide the crown. Caleb stood beneath the banners with his perfect robes and fading smile, surrounded not by worship, but by the silence of people finally seeing the strings above their heads. Adrian did not order a spectacle. He simply removed Caleb from royal authority, placed the temple under council review, and commanded that every Omega record sealed by the priesthood be opened to the families who had been denied the truth. It was the first royal decree Noah heard not as a prisoner, substitute, or secret, but as someone whose existence had changed the shape of the room. When the court dismissed, Adrian did not reach for the fallen crown. He left it on the marble and walked beside Noah through the long corridor where, only one day before, nobles had whispered that the rejected Omega should not have survived. Now those same nobles stepped aside. Some bowed to Adrian. Some bowed to Noah. The gesture felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but Noah did not lower his eyes. Snow continued beyond the windows, soft and endless, covering the palace roofs in white. By evening, the royal wedding chamber had been opened again, but it no longer looked like a tomb. The black candles were gone. The velvet drapes had been tied back. The iron restraints had been removed from the marble columns and placed on the floor to be taken away. In their place, a fire burned low in the hearth, warm enough to turn the silver walls gold. Noah stood near the window, watching the city lights appear one by one below the hill, while Adrian remained several feet behind him, careful even now, as if tenderness was a language he had learned from a damaged book and feared mispronouncing. "You should rest," Adrian said. His voice held no command this time, only concern. Noah smiled faintly without turning around. "I spent years resting in rooms other people chose for me." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped closer, stopping at Noah's side, not touching him, not claiming space he had not been given. "I was afraid the night would destroy you," he said. Noah looked at their reflections in the glass. The king without his crown, the Omega no longer hidden, both pale and tired beneath the firelight, both alive in a room meant to prove the opposite. "It did," Noah answered softly. Adrian turned to him, pain flashing across his face, but Noah continued before he could speak. "It destroyed the boy who believed being rejected meant being worthless. It destroyed the shadow my family left behind. It destroyed the lie that I was born empty." Outside, the snow slowed, and the first clear patch of moonlight touched the balcony rail. Adrian lowered his head, not in defeat, but in reverence, his forehead hovering near Noah's hand until Noah gently allowed the closeness. It was not a grand declaration. It was not the kind of moment singers would turn into a palace ballad. It was smaller than that, and because it was smaller, it felt real. "I do not know how to be loved without fearing the cost," Adrian admitted. Noah's fingers rested lightly over the old pale marks at his wrist, where the chains had once taught him to survive alone. "Then we will learn slowly," he said. Weeks later, the crown was returned to Adrian in a public ceremony, but he did not wear it until Noah stood beside him on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The people below did not see a cursed king and his replacement groom. They saw two figures in white winter light, one dark as cedar and storm, one bright as snow and flowers, standing equal beneath a sky finally clearing. And when the palace bells rang again, Noah did not hear a warning. He heard a beginning.